You spent 40 years saving it. Now the terrifying part, spending it without running out. There's one number that tells you how much you can safely pull out each year, and it starts with 4%. In your first year of retirement, you take about 4% of everything you've saved. On $1 million, that's $40,000 for the year. Then, each year after, you just give that amount a small raise for inflation. That's the 4% rule. Here's why that question hits so hard. For your whole working life, the math ran one way: spend less than you earn, and save the difference. Then you retire, and overnight you're asked to do the exact opposite: spend the pile down on purpose, with no paycheck coming in behind it. And a quiet fear starts humming under everything. What if I take too much, too early, and run dry at 85 with years still ahead of me? That fear is so real that a lot of careful savers spend their whole retirement afraid to enjoy a dollar they worked for. The 4% rule exists to answer that one question. How much can you take and still be okay? So let's be exact about what the rule actually says, because most people get it a little wrong. It's really just 2 steps. Step 1. In your very first year of retirement, you add up everything you've saved and invested, and you take out 4% of it. If that's $1 million, 4% is $40,000 for the year. If it's $500,000, it's $20,000. Step 2 is the part almost everyone misses. Every year after the first, you don't run the math again. You take last year's amount and raise it just enough to keep up with inflation. So if prices rose 3%, that $40,000 becomes about $41,200 the next year. You're not taking 4% of whatever your balance happens to be on a given morning. You take 4% once, to set your starting paycheck. Then inflation raises it from there. Hold on to that difference, because it's exactly where the rule gets misunderstood. That's the whole rule: 4% to start, then inflation raises after. If you'd rather understand a number like this than just be handed it, subscribe, and we'll keep doing exactly this. Because 2 real questions are still open. Why 4%? Why not 5 or 3? And what's the one thing that can quietly break this rule, even if you follow it perfectly? The answers both trace back to a study that ran every American retirement since the Great Depression through a brutal stress test. Here's the part that quietly does the most work: the misunderstanding that makes people think the rule is broken when it isn't. A lot of folks hear 4% and picture themselves taking 4% of their balance every single year. So in a good year, the account jumps and they take more. In a crash it drops and they take less. A paycheck that lurches around with the market. That is not the rule, and honestly, that version really doesn't work. The real rule sets your withdrawal once, in the first year, and every year after only follows inflation, not the market. Think of it less like a slot machine and more like a starting salary. You set it on day 1, then give yourself a cost of living raise each year, no matter what the market did. And here's the line worth remembering: 4% was never a promise you won't run out. It's the biggest starting paycheck that survived even the worst year in history to retire. A safe starting point, not a guarantee. Get that one distinction right, and most of the confusion around this rule just falls away. So why 4% and not 5 or 3? It traces back to 1994, and a financial planner named William Bengen, who got tired of everyone guessing. He took the real history of the American market, stocks and bonds, going back to 1926, and ran a brutal test. He asked, whatever year you retired, How much could you have pulled out each year and still not run dry over 30 years? He ran it for someone retiring in 1929, right into the crash, and for every other year on record. He was hunting for the single worst moment to have started, not the average. And the worst case wasn't the Great Crash. It was the person who retired in the late 1960s and walked straight into the 1970s, a decade where high inflation quietly ate a retirement alive. Even that unluckiest retiree, Bengen found, could have taken about 4% raised for inflation each year and still not run dry. 4 years later, in 1998, 3 professors at Trinity University came at it a different way and landed in nearly the same place, which is why people still call it the Trinity Study. That's the whole foundation. 4% isn't a marketing round number. It's the amount that held up for the unluckiest retiree in modern history. Now the honest part, because anyone who sells you 4% as a magic promise is, well, selling you something. It's a strong starting point, but it bends in 3 real ways. First, the order of your returns matters more than the average. A bad crash in your first few years of retirement while you're taking money out does far more damage than the same crash later on, because you're selling shares while they're down, and the account never fully recovers. Second, you are not a robot, and that's good news. The rule assumes you blindly take your inflation raise even in a terrible year. A real person can skip that raise after a bad market, or trim spending for a while, and that flexibility alone can let you start a little higher. Third, the 4% came from a particular slice of history. Some careful researchers argue that with today's prices and lower bond yields, a cautious retiree might start nearer 3 or 3.5%. Others say 4 still holds, or that you can go higher if you stay flexible. The honest answer is that it's a sensible range, not a single sacred figure. And to be clear, this is education, not advice for your exact situation. Your taxes, your health, a pension, how long you might live, all of it moves your number, so treat 4% as the start of a conversation, not the last word. Do your own homework, and if the stakes are high, talk to someone who's paid to act in your interest. So here's where that leaves you, and it's a calmer place than the fear. 4% isn't a cage, and it isn't a crystal ball. It's a compass. It takes the most paralyzing question in retirement: how much can I actually spend? And turns it from a blank you dread into a starting number you can work with. On $1 million, you begin around $40,000 a year. Watch those first few years closely. Stay a little flexible when the market is ugly, and you've got something almost nobody gives themselves: permission to actually spend the money you spent a lifetime building. Because the quiet tragedy in retirement usually isn't running out. It's the careful saver who dies with most of it untouched, afraid the whole time of a number they could have known all along. So here's the whole thing in one breath. The 4% rule says you can pull about 4% of your savings in your first year of retirement, then raise that amount for inflation each year after. On $1 million, that's $40,000 to start. A planner named Bengen and 3 professors at Trinity stress-tested it against every market since the Great Depression, and it held even for the unluckiest retiree, which is exactly why it's a safe starting point, and not a guarantee. Here's one thing you can do in the next 30 seconds. Take whatever you've saved so far and find 4% of it. 100,000 throws off about 4,000 a year. 1 million throws off 40,000. And just look at that number. That's the rough paycheck your savings could pay you today. It tells you how far along you really are, which beats the fog every single time. Subscribe if you want the money questions that scare people turned into plain arithmetic you can run yourself. Calm investors. Build wealth with patience, not panic.